So I am very excited to be on again with Brandon Weichert, the author of Biohacked, China's Race to Control Life. Brandon, it's good to talk to you again. Lots happened. Tell me what's going on. And please tell us about yourself and how you got into this work and what you're working on now.
Well, I got into this work. I started working in politics for the Republican Party. I actually was a volunteer and when I turned 16 in 2004 and completely loved it. Got involved with politics as a profession in my early 20s, rather, all throughout college. I went to college at DePaul University. Was very politically active on campus as the college Republican president. We were one of the most active groups in the country. And then my real passion, though, was national security policy. Because I suffer from a very debilitating autoimmune disease, basically, I couldn't join the military. That was the original plan. And so I very badly, all my friends went and I didn't get to go. So it's always been sort of a problem for me. But I was able to segue my campaign experience into getting a job on Capitol Hill. I worked for Ted Yoho, who was the congressman from the 3rd District of Florida, Gainesville area, and worked on a host of issues while I was there, including trade, science, and tech. And I split some of the work on foreign affairs with another guy there. And
So you got all over the place.
All over the place. And now I'm a consultant. I'm primarily a subject matter expert for the United States Department of the Air Force, and they bring me in to talk about things like biotech and how China's using it. And sort of, I guess the term that I heard used to describe what I do is, I always say I'm a geopolitical analyst. That's my kind of academic background. I got my master's from the Institute of World Politics in Washington, D.C. I spent some time at Oxford studying history and whatnot. And so I used to say I was a geopolitical analyst, but nowadays the military likes to describe me as a geotechnology analyst because I'm not just looking at geopolitics. I'm looking at how technology development and the race to control new technologies affects national security and geopolitics.
Wow. Okay. Well, I've not clearly been doing enough with my time. So, and you actually sent me another book that I really started enjoying. I just started reading. Yeah. And that was Winning Space.
Yeah, my first one. Yeah.
We'll talk about that in another episode.
Okay.
But what I was really impressed with was this book really showed kind of the breadth of your knowledge. You know, it's just very impressive. Now, I was a contractor in government, so I do know that you do learn a lot. You know, as they move you around contract to contract. Yeah. But in your case, so you're some pretty deep fields. So you know, it's very impressive. So let's get right into it. There's a lot going on lately. I think the best way to do this, because there's so much in here, and by the way, it's a great book. What I like about it, it's kind of it gets you a full view of everything that's going on. And there's so many good citations in here that it allows you to go deeper on each chapter as you go through it. Now, lately in the news, and when I called you for this, I said, hey, open up our conversation with anything you want to talk about that relates to this type of research that you've been seeing in the news lately. Is anything sticking out at you?
I am fundamentally convinced, and I'm also senior editor for 1945.com. That's right. 19fortyfive.com. Yeah. I just finished a 5-part series on the China threat. I'm waiting for the 5th part to be published now. But basically, I am of the mind that we actually might be looking at a Chinese invasion of Taiwan, not in 2027, which is when Mark Milley and the boys have said that they're going to do that. I think it could actually be by this October.
You really think so? Well,
I think it's a possibility that we need to really be prepared for.
I mean, we're looking at, 3 weeks, right?
Well, we just saw I think one of the largest military exercises in Fujian province, in which they were corralling not just their 3 aircraft carriers, but they were corralling, which is what I've been telling people to watch out for, the deployment of the Ro-Ro ferries. Those are the roll-on, roll-off ferries that are used in civilian life to transport cars across the river, sort of like in New York. You go from Jersey to New York.
Time out on that. My son yesterday became very interested in looking at these Spratly Islands, where they've been building up. Chinese Communist Party has been building up a ton of stuff there. So my question to you is this: you just mentioned those ferries, and I saw what looked like, and I think this was on. I'll have to post the the location. But what I noticed was it just there was like a launch ramp like for a boat, and I could see big tires, right?
Yeah.
And then we both saw this ferry, like this flat thing.
Right.
He's like, oh, that's a frigate, and he's been getting into like military stuff.
Yeah.
And I said, I don't think so. That kind of looks like some sort of a barge. Is that what I'm looking at?
Yeah, so I don't know precisely what you're looking at. That could be the Ro-Ro ferry, or that could be the hovercraft. They have a fleet of hovercrafts that can go, I think, like 100 kilometers an hour, that can carry large vehicles like tanks and whatnot, and they move very quickly. And so I am very concerned now. Obviously, October could be way early logistically, but I think that definitely between now and 2025. I am very worried about a Chinese hit on Taiwan. Xi Jinping is desperate right now. He is certainly going through an economic downturn. I don't know if it's the collapse of China. I know that's sort of been the drumbeat for the last 20 years. I don't know if that's the case. We go through many economic downturns in our country, and it doesn't end the country. It usually ends the regime, the presidential administration. It might be the end of Xi Jinping as ruler of China. But I think that he is keenly aware that his economic situation is coming to an end. So he needs to pivot and get his people focused on an outward threat. And he needs to remind his people why he's the next Mao, because he alone can incorporate Taiwan into the greater China, a new imperial project. And only he can do that, he believes. So he likes to surprise his opponents. You look at his career in politics, he has been one big surprise after another. His rise was a surprise. So I would be very worried that this is not your typical Chinese leader who is pragmatic and cautious and sort of waits for consensus to build among the Politburo. This is a guy who wants to lead. He wants to lean into difficulty so that he can get all the credit. And so I'm very worried about that prospect.
Understood. Well, on that note, I'm sorry to the audience. I never seem to have good news, and nor do any of my friends like you, because I guess the fields we're in. So,
these are what we would call indicators and warnings, as you know. So
indicators and warnings. And look, what I tell people is like, this is war, and that's what I believe it is. And for me, having been in investigations, intelligence for all my life, I find transparency to be very. The more you learn, the happier you are in my world, and probably with you as well. So
I have a lot of enemies because of the work that I do, not just overseas, but even within our own government, because I spill the beans, I guess.
Oh, that'll certainly do it. I know.
Within reason. I can honestly say I've never in my time put anybody's life at risk in terms of things that I've broken. I'm very conscientious about that because I do consider myself a patriot. So
I put a few people's lives at risks, but that they were in my iron sights. So I'll just, anyways, I could hear the feedback now. Hey, but so on that note, let's just look at that first. Just scanning through your chapters. Let me read these off because like I've been sharing this book so much. Warfare Through Other Means, Chapter 1, Loose Lips and COVID-19 Sink Ships. Big things have small beginnings.
Yeah.
Terrifying. Of pandemics and censorship, the true origins of COVID. But then we get into the part that really, really caught my attention, and that's the biological terror. And then really just, I mean, a lot of it is a lot of the stuff we talked about, the new programs, the super soldier programs.
Yeah.
What are you most worried about now? Let's say there's an attack in October, which I think is credible and it makes sense because it's a short window because of maritime conditions. They have to do
exactly
October or the spring, correct?
Yeah.
So and I've flown in the South China Sea on a C5 with a 5-ton truck next to me, or a deuce and a half.
Yeah.
Well, I thought that thing was going to rip through the plane. It's terrible. And then, of course, for vessels, I'm sure it's worse. So, anyways, let's say there is an attack in this coming October 2023. And God, I hope you're incorrect, and I don't.
Me too. I say this all the time. I'm happy to be wrong.
But I feel it. I feel things are ramping up. So, what type of biological threat could we expect, or are we experiencing it now?
Yeah. So I am less convinced. So basically, as I note in the book, COVID-19, I believe, was a biological 9/11. That was not my term, by the way. That was coined, and this is why I love these guys, by two Marine Corps intelligence colonels that were at one of my briefings years ago during the pandemic. And they were saying that they thought it was a biological 9/11. Leave it to the Marines to say it like it is, because, nobody else was allowed at the time to even talk like that. But I think that COVID-19 was really the Great Reset, as they say, not in the sense of Klaus Schwab, who's an idiot, but in the sense that China was resetting the geopolitical situation, flattening America, making America weak and divided beyond what it was at that time, removing the last vestiges of America's political defense, which was Donald Trump and his people, and replacing it with, let's face it, a highly compromised Joe Biden. I mean, it worked like a charm. So I don't know if they're going to necessarily repeat that kind of attack because it's already served its purpose. They might. I'm more concerned about direct military strikes against our satellites. I'm more worried about EM spectrum disruptions, which they're training to do. I'm more worried about cyber Pearl Harbor type situation targeting U.S. infrastructure. By the way, that F-35 that went down in South Carolina, I am convinced was part of this Chinese probing operations. The Russians would call it probicilia. I think that's what they would call it, probicilia. And so this is a probing action. And so I'm more worried about that in the near term. However, I will say we know these kamikaze labs have been built in the United States. Remember a couple of months ago, my friend Gordon Chang and I were talking about this at the Gateston Institute. The FBI arrested a group of Chinese scientists who were illegally running an open air, basically biological safety level 4 lab with no safety containment and no safety restrictions at all in Fresno. And it is believed that they were, yes. And so I actually said to Gordon, and he incorporated this in his writings, the kamikaze lab is what I called it. I don't believe that was the only one. I think they've got a string of pearls all throughout the West Coast of the United States where they are running these illegal, under the table labs where they are concocting all manners of biological crises. We know that they were playing with a new form of COVID at this lab, and that they were probably infecting rats with it and having the rats go out into the wider population to spread the disease. And what was going on at that time, I know because my whole family, we caught the new strain of COVID. Everybody was getting sick at the beginning of August, and it was a huge spike coinciding with the arrest
this past August.
Yeah, this just a month ago.
No.
And we had a huge spike here in Florida, at least, and it was massive. And I think it coincided with these labs. So that could be another chaos. Yeah.
How? I mean, are you saying you think they were, and I believe you.
Right.
Um, are you saying they released these things?
I think they're releasing this stuff into the atmosphere within the United States. The goal of COVID is not to kill every American. I make that very clear in the book. The goal of COVID is a political goal. It is to cause chaos at the home front, so much so that we are unable to project power to defend Taiwan. They're also, by the way, at Wuhan Institute of Virology, which is where I believe, and I've tracked and I've spoken with the DARPA investigators. I've researched what they were doing. The DARPA is convinced that this came from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, the original COVID strain. They're also doing the same things they were doing with COVID at that lab. They're doing with smallpox. And so that could also be the next biological 9/11 is they're going to escalate now with a deadlier pathogen. COVID was just a proof of concept. Now they're going to hit us maybe in the next, who knows, the next year, in the next 6 weeks, who knows, with possibly, God help us, smallpox. But those are some of the options they have
Yeah.
with Ebola and Nipah as well. They have those pathogens at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and they're doing the same experiments on those pathogens that they were doing on coronaviruses as well as smallpox.
So what would the delivery device be? I mean, you said you think it's being sprayed in the air.
Could be. Yep.
Would that be from planes?
Well, it was an open air facility in Fresno. It was an
Hmm.
old warehouse. There was no
Yeah.
containment. So they were doing all these things in the open. So just naturally it's going to seep out. We know that they had live mice and rats there. They might have been releasing that into the general populace. California has a lot of homeless problems. So it wouldn't be unheard of that these rats would then infect human beings and then gets into the populace and they're infecting all of us. Again, it's not necessarily to kill the Americans. It's just to cause chaos and fear. We're talking again. The Biden administration was talking in August, at least, about reinstituting the mask mandates. Remember this. They're talking about, going back to zero COVID type policies. That's what the head of the CDC was talking about, I think about 3 or 4 weeks ago.
Right.
Why?
No.
Be-
Why
because
exactly?
of this. Because of
Oh,
this.
if I may, I mean, just to as a playing devil's advocate,
Sure.
some have speculated that it's because they expected the Kraken
Right.
strain to be worse than it was, and they're stuck with all these vaccines, so they got to create a fear to sell the
That could
vaccines.
be it.
Is
Yeah.
there? Do you think that is part? I'm not trying to minimize the fear.
No, I think that
Wish I
both
could.
could be true. I think both could be true. Is that
Yeah.
the Chinese, the Chinese have a very good read on us, and they know how to play Western societies. And this sort of gets me into a larger discussion. We don't have to go here, but
Go wherever you want.
I was talking with my colleague Michael Walsh, who wrote the great book, The Great Reset, and he against the Great Reset. And I was chatting with him, and I was saying, I actually don't think the World Economic Forum is actually operating of its own volition. I think they're all useful idiots, and they've all been captured, whether knowingly or unknowingly, by the communist Chinese, who are using them to keep down the West, to
Brandon,
impose.
thank you. I've been. I hate to interrupt you. I do it all
Yeah.
the time. I'm Irish, but the I've been getting, so I started doing some presentations on One Health, and I've been
Yeah.
saying the same exact thing, and getting attacked by people in our side of
Yep.
common sense thinking, good people, but they're like, oh, like I was called deep state the other day. They're like,
Yeah. Me
he
too.
has ties to the military. I'm like a disabled veteran. I get a check every month. Of course, I have ties to the military.
We want
But
those guys on our side, by the way. We want the military guys on
yeah,
our
and
side.
so when I see that, it's like, oh, everyone wants it to be the WEF. Now,
Right.
I don't know if that's because it's more like a Batman movie that way, or it's Western hubris, like they
Yeah.
couldn't possibly outsmart us, the Chinese Communist Party? I don't know. But when I look at it, it just seems so common sense. There's so much bankrollingness going on with the WEF. It's like, yeah, you could say the WEF is doing it, but China has a freaking military. Like, I don't care what your evil, mustache twisting, monocle adjusting plans are, you have to enforce it. Now, it can be argued that money makes governments do things to control their military and law enforcement to be that enforcement arm, but you're not going to have the uniformity and the centralized command that way. You're going to have a chaos. Also, so I agree with you.
Remember also that globalism is the ideology of the Klaus Schwabs of the world. Globalism is not very attractive to most people. It's too amorphous. It's too ambiguous. There's no real definition of it. Nationalism, though, is very empowering because it is elevating a certain group of people within a defined, contiguous geography, whether it be China or the United States or Germany or whatever. It's very compelling to people. Even Stalin had to do socialism in one country because the Leninist vision of a communist international just wasn't that appealing. So you had to focus one country at a time. So the Klaus Schwabs of the world, they may believe they're pulling the strings, but they can't possibly be because the ideology they're married to, this globalist ethos, is not attractive to most people. What is attractive, though, is the Chinese model, which is it's nationalism married to political communism with state capitalism as its economy. That's much more powerful. That's much more compelling. And it gives China a lot of capabilities that the WEF otherwise lacks. It's just a group of rich people getting together, talking about how they'd like to control the world. Well, China actually has the muscle and the money to do it, and they're happy to do it by basically co-opting the World Economic Forum to keep their enemies in the West down while China runs roughshod over their part of the world. And that's what I think's happening. And so that's why I say,
with you, man.
Yeah, and that's why I say it could be both when we talk about COVID. It could be China is absolutely doing nefarious things with new strains, as well as the Biden administration and CDC and all these other groups are pushing this COVID fear so they can sell more vaccines. The two are not mutually exclusive. They're working in tandem, whether they know it or not.
Exactly, I totally agree with you, and and of course, Xi Jinping is in the WEF and he's in the WTO.
So is Putin, by the way.
Yeah, and the way I would even add, I totally agree with you, and we're very alone in that. Trust me.
I know that.
Like I've been viciously attacked. I'm like, this is how you lose a battle is when you start attacking each other over your theories. Personally, I don't care. Who's behind it? I just care who is coming to my house or to my community, and I'll work my way up the food chain, and maybe at the end. And I would just say to people, they're people who are not trained in intelligence work. They don't understand that what they're doing with figuring all this stuff out. Now, figuring it out for targeting reasons is good. But they're just figuring it out to figure it out. That's strategic intelligence, like real DI type stuff. And it's important in the long run. It's important for future strategy and grand strategies. But right now, the way I see it is, okay, let's figure out what's going to hit us now, what's going to hit us locally. Then we can hash that out, because to me, it doesn't matter. And I also see it as what I see China trying to, they are nationalists without a doubt. And thank you for knowing this. Like, I wish more people would get smart on China, modern China, because they are nationalists. They have no interest in sharing that table with anyone. They've made that clear. And I've read Xi Jinping thought, which you can now read in their constitution because he forced it in there. But they're trying to make the world China, I believe, through the Belt and Road, or One Belt Road, and more insidious. And I'd love to talk to you about this in the future when you've had a chance to look at it, if you haven't already. But I think they're using this One Health ideology, which at the top of it, they've got George Gao, who I know you know very well, as part of the commission. where it gives the W8. It's like the ideology behind world public health.
Yes.
And it goes into financials, land
Yep.
allocation. It goes beyond
Yep.
just the animals and all that.
Yep.
It even goes into community. What do they call it? Community and social surveillance, which is a snitch network.
Yeah.
And so I
it's
think
East Berlin on steroids, you know.
So let me ask you this. So, because this is a bit self-serving, I guess, but my whole theory on the One Health thing, and are you familiar with it?
Yeah, absolutely. You shared
Okay.
it with yes.
Is it's like a pre-installed government waiting for, kind of like, I always say this, kind of like in War of the Worlds, where they pre-installed those giant walkers and then they zap them with lightning and they come alive and they start tearing things up. I see One Health as the legal equivalent of that, the authoritative equivalent of those things. And the lightning would be the next pandemic, which activates the treaty at WHO, which is built on One Health frameworks.
Yeah.
Which last one was written by the World Bank and Eco Health Alliance.
Yes. And in fact, one of the reasons that I picked the subtitle that everybody hones in on of my book, China's Race to Control Life, is because it isn't just the actual kind of genetics where they're trying to really control our very DNA and the DNA of all living things, but it's also the political ideology undergirding it, as you point out. There is an ideology undergirding the quest to use CRISPR-Cas9, which is the gene editing tool that we created. There is an ideology behind it to use it not just to help people, which it can actually probably help people, but to actually weaponize it and use it to further geopolitical ends. And that's what China's doing. And they're marrying it to their lawfare, which they've been waging on us for far longer than they have any other kind of warfare. That and trade war and lawfare. Those are the two they've been really hitting us with since the 70s, using our laws against us, basically, and international laws. And so you look at these sort of these ideas that are being bandied about by the World Health Organization, by the World Economic Forum, by these sort of quasi-private companies and nonprofits in the health space. Well, it's all aligning perfectly with the ultimate objectives and goals of the Politburo in Beijing. That's not a coincidence. It's not a coincidence at all. And, we really need to be waking up to it, because all of the people, you say our side, but I've learned, unfortunately, I feel increasingly like I don't really have a side anymore.
Right.
But basically everybody who should be on our side is really fixated on World Economic Forum and going after Klaus Schwab. Well, you know what? There's an even bigger baddie behind him. And he might not even realize it. He might genuinely believe he's the man behind the curtain. But there's another curtain behind him, and that person is Xi Jinping, and he's the one pulling all the strings and manipulating everybody and laughing about it.
Totally,
and so this is what scares me.
agree with you. Totally,
it scares the hell out of me, because we're not addressing that. How many people on our side of the aisle, and when I say our side of the aisle, I'm not talking about the conservatives of the GOP. I'm talking about people who are like really hard right. They are saying we shouldn't even be protecting Taiwan. We shouldn't even be engaging with China militarily. We should just focus on ourselves. I understand the appeal to that, but that is a very dangerous assertion, because Taiwan is not Ukraine. And, there's this sort of attempt by everybody to link the two. Even the Ukrainians have tried to link themselves to Taiwan, but it's a very different context in every way imaginable. Taiwan is night and day from Ukraine. And so if we don't take this threat seriously, it isn't just going to be the Taiwanese who pay the price. It's going to be the whole world, because China doesn't just want Taiwan. Taiwan is a stepping stone to a larger project, which is global conquest.
Are you familiar with the 36 stratagems, roughly?
Absolutely. I had to read that in Dr. Liu's class.
Okay, no expert, but I do know what scares me about even the focus on Taiwan, and I totally agree with you. It's critical. And it's not just critical in terms of the semiconductor manufacturing, which it's to me it seems very critical because I see it as almost like a geographic stepping stone to the
It
rest of
is.
the islands.
Right.
I almost see the fact that we know so much about China's intentions with Taiwan. Granted, they're historical, so they couldn't really keep that under the rug. But it seems almost like they want us focused to the east.
Yes.
And if
And
you
yeah, there
go,
is a lot going on with the Philippines right now that's also very concerning. I have a dear friend who is a very senior, one of our military guys in Manila.
mhm,
And I was just communicating with him about a few days ago, and there's a lot of stuff going on that we're not getting word of in the press here
do tell.
with China. Well, it's China's getting very aggressive toward the Philippines. They seem to be being more belligerent now than they usually are. I mean, they're always nasty toward the Philippines, but this is pointed and directed. And it would not surprise me if the Philippines feel the brunt of whatever China is planning militarily rather than Taiwan. Also, and I do a lot of I do a lot of work with India. I would be very careful if I were the Indians in Ladakh province. That is not a settled issue. What could conceivably happen, and this is a Chinese maneuver, is they'll keep us focused on Taiwan, and they'll start striking these what they think are lower hanging fruits in the Philippines and northern India. And then after a period of time, after we're all focused on those issues, then they'll pivot and do the mother of all attacks on Taiwan. Because you're right, Taiwan, it's not just the semiconductors. It's the physical geography, its location. MacArthur referred to it as the unsinkable aircraft carrier. That's not wrong. It's completely correct. For
Right.
us, it's a force multiplier, a projection of our power into China,
Mhm.
right next door to China. For China, if they can take it, not only can they push our power projection capabilities over the horizon, but they can also then, with northern Taiwan, directly threaten Japan, who is their
That's
great
right.
regional enemy.
God, we
And
are. I tell you what, the only person besides you, who's totally connected on this is my 12-year-old, and that's a not an insult. That is certainly
right,
a compliment because I've been telling
right,
my son because it's not that people don't know, it's just that they're like busy, and my
right,
son is a captive audience. So I'm
right,
like, what if they're not? Like, what if they're just going to lay siege forever on Taiwan because
right,
it's
right,
kind of a meat grinder if they go in
right.
now.
Exactly.
And I've
Well, very
always
similar
said,
to what Russia's doing in Ukraine. I don't believe Russia's losing, and I lose a lot of friends when I
oh,
say
they're
this.
not. They're
I don't
not.
say this because I'm pro Russia. I say this because I'm pro reality. And the reality is that these pinprick strikes that Ukraine is doing, they're very gallant, but they're not going to win the war because Russia can just attrite them. And that's
Yeah.
exactly what China's going to try to do. The real question is, how is China going to be able to do such a strategy knowing that our Navy is just around the corner? And I think that's where the attacks on satellites occur. That's where the
Yep.
attacks on the EM spectrum occur. That's where the attacks on cyber occur. And that's where those ballistic missiles, those anti-ship ballistic missiles really come in handy.
Well, and I think going back to, what you're writing about, I think that's where the bioweapons come in because what really scares me, and I wouldn't say scares. I'm too much of a nutcase to be really scared of what I should be, but um, the the timing of this latest immigrant surge.
Yeah.
What happened right early last week, I believe. Um, China, the Chinese Communist Party had a delegation in Mexico,
Yep.
and all of a sudden we have the surge. Now they could be just totally random. I
It's not
doubt it, but the fact that there were train loads pouring into
right.
this country, the fact that they are, I'm outside of Boston, and I don't see a plan to, I'm not, I'm totally against, and I'll just say it, I'm totally against this current jab. But I do believe there are vaccines that people at a minimum should have,
I
and
agree.
there's no requirements at all for not only the jabs but English, and that's going into public schools. And I
Yes.
just see this as this with fentanyl, and whatever other diseases are coming in, and they are okay. What a great way to gum up the armed forces with God knows what you mentioned smallpox, I believe,
Mm-hmm.
earlier.
Yep.
Polio. There, I see Ebola is being
Yep.
talked about by Maurice Koopsman, who was part of the whole
Mm-hmm.
Dajik clique. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and it just seems like you gum that up, and then on top of that, yeah, little capture of our leadership in the military because look at Milley's proposed
Phone call.
replacement.
Well, Lily's phone call to China when January 6th was going on. Don't worry, we're not going to nuke you. I'm
Yeah,
sorry, but
but Milley's out. Have you seen his replacement that they
the
put?
Air Force guy, right?
Yeah,
General.
Frank Gaffney has a whole
Yeah,
plan set up to stop this guy, and I
yeah,
should be more prepared and have his name in front of me. The wokest of the woke, and
yeah.
we all know that woke is just, I mean, it's
It's
just
communism.
garbage Marxism.
Yeah.
Um, and so I see you're right, and I see these things moving right now. If you look at the patterns of the way things are moving, and the reason I brought up the 36 stratagems is because the sixth stratagem says feign east and then attack west.
Right.
And
Right.
so who knows, the attack
Right.
may be on us and it may be kinetic because if
Well, they have to. They have to hit us because
think
if
so,
they
yeah.
don't if they don't clip our wings before they go into Taiwan, then the whole Taiwanese invasion or blockade is completely dead on arrival
Yep.
because if our systems are operating fully, if our country is relatively peaceful at home, then we will have the ability to just deploy and interdict. So they've got to clip those satellites. They've got the constellations I tell the military to watch out for.
Hmm.
So the wideband global satcom would be the multi-user objective system (MUOS), which is basically how the Navy moves its ships around the world. They're gonna take those systems out. They've already targeted
Right.
them,
Yeah, of
and then they're
course.
gonna clip our NC3 functions. Those are nuclear command and communicate control and communication satellites. The Chinese already deployed the Shijian 21, which is
Hmm.
a co-orbital satellite with claws. It's like something from Moonraker, and it is tailgating our satellites in geosync orbit, which is the highest orbit away from the Earth, where all those satellite constellations I'm talking about are located. And they with those grappling claws, they can physically push those satellites out of their orbits, send them tumbling toward the Earth, and
Wow.
we don't have the ability to replace them. There's only two replacements on hand for the WGS. 70% of U.S. military, the U.S. Army in particular, 70% of their weapon systems rely on the wideband global SATCOM system. They can knock that out.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
And so, that
Unbelievable.
this is how the Chinese are going to beat us. They have got to hit us, and it might not be with a direct strike kinetically on the United States, but it will be in cyber, across the EM spectrum, in space. And kinetically, what we need to worry about after they've basically disconnected our forces from each other and from
Mhm.
their commands is that anti-ship ballistic missile capability that they've built up, the Dongfeng 21D carrier killer, for instance. We're going to have to worry about the surface-to-surface long-range ballistic. I'm not even talking nukes right now. I'm talking just
No, I know you're
conventional.
talking about
They've
sure.
targeted the landing strips and they've ranged all of our known landing strips in the region, especially Guam. I mean, Guam is going to get jacked up if
Oh,
if this thing goes kinetic.
they don't, but
Uh,
see, the thing is, they don't have to get jacked up. Neither do the Solomon Islands because they've captured their
Yeah,
government.
you're true. That's right. Yes, but they're going to have, but particularly they're going to have to hit us at least in space, cyber, and EM to
Hmm.
have a real shot at doing what they want to do to Taiwan. Something to consider. I keep telling the Navy whenever I deal with them, forget about flat tops. Aircraft carriers are a relic of World War II. They're just
Hmm.
big, beautiful targets to sink. What
Mm.
we need to be surging is submarines. That's what we need. We don't have enough of them. We saw the USS Connecticut, that Seawolf class submarine, which was doing an intelligence operation against Hainan Island. There's a very covert, I think it's the Yulin Naval Facility. There's a very sophisticated Chinese naval facility in Hainan Island. Our people were trying to get electronic surveillance on it, and they supposedly hit the rock formation on the bottom of the South China Sea. I don't believe that's what happened. I think the Chinese
Gotcha.
attacked it. I think they
Okay.
attacked it. And so to get them
So,
away from collecting intelligence on that facility, because there's something going on at that facility that we want to find out about and the Chinese do not want us to know about.
so when, I mean, geographically, what do you think that is? I guess,
At Hainan, well,
Mhm.
it could just be that they're building more submarines in those pens than we can see with our sats, or it could be they're developing a new weapon. I thought maybe they might have hit the Connecticut with an experimental underwater kind of hypersonic weapon that they're developing. The Russians have the Poseidon torpedo. I thought it might be something like that. We know the Chinese, I mean, this is what Biohacked is only part of my studies into Chinese exotic technology. So that is one thing that I've been very concerned about. Chinese hypersonic capabilities outstrip our own. And they have the world's largest wind tunnel facility. I think it's in Xi'an,
What
where
does
they
what
are.
does a what does a wind tunnel
It
facility do?
allows you to test in real time whether a hypersonic vehicle will work. And because theirs is the largest, I think our Navy has the Lens 2, which was built in the 60s. It's not that great. The Chinese version is the largest in the world, so they can build a fully functional prototype and then test it in real time and learn everything they need to. And if it works, okay, we'll mass produce it and stream it out. And the last hypersonic test that they did in China, the glide vehicle landed within 20 miles of its intended target.
Wow.
Now,
Wait,
that's in
now,
the
is
Gobi
that
Desert.
confirmed, or is that just from
Yeah,
their
no, that was
forward
no, that was
area
confirmed.
officers?
No, that was confirmed by DIA. And the
Okay.
the group that I always like, the two agencies I really like in our government dealing with Defense Intelligence Agency, I think they
Sure.
usually have it going on, and National Security Agency. Now I know there's a lot of moral issues there, but I think those are the two agencies, and NGA. I think those are the three agencies that are probably my favorite. And the guys at DIA I know they're confirming that this thing hit within 20 miles of its
Wow.
intended target. Now, think about that. Circled the Earth, I think, like 20 times at 3,800 miles an
It's
hour,
amazing.
and it landed within 20 miles. Now, if you put a nuclear warhead on that vehicle, that's an acceptable range to do damage. Obviously, if you have smaller yield weapons, 20 miles is still a long way away. But the F-35, that's our big fifth generation fighter. I'm more of an F-22
Sure.
kind of a guy,
Yeah.
but I've been
Yeah.
to it. There is one facility that mass produces the F-35 on the West Coast of the United States,
Hmm.
and I'm not going to say where it is, but the Chinese absolutely know where it is.
Of course.
And so you can
Of
bet
course.
that if it comes down to a shooting war, they're going to deploy that beautiful hypersonic kill vehicle. And as the colonel at the Western Air Defense Sector told me 2 years ago, presently our air defense network cannot repel a hypersonic attack.
Real
And
quick
so,
question.
yeah,
Real quick question. I'm sorry, and because
no, please,
we're gonna
I'm
have
going
to do a
hand
to be
now.
continued on this one.
Yes.
This is yeah. My first thought when I saw this news about the F-35 is it got hacked, or it got hit with an
Yeah.
EMP, because I'm not a pilot, nor have I been. I've jumped out of planes. That's it. But
Right.
all the pilots I know have radios that they carry even if they leave the aircraft. Why did this guy have to use someone's home
Right.
phone to call
Right.
911? Was he hit with an EMP? Was the plane hacked? What do you think, really quick? And then we're going to have
Okay.
to wrap it up, and we're
I
definitely going to do a couple parts. This is a
okay.
lot more info that I planned on, and I'm glad you're sharing it and you're
Okay.
willing to share.
Okay. My theory is the probable theory is that it was a hack. The F-35 is laden with Chinese built equipment, and hardware. So I suspect that's what it was. Another theory I heard from a friend of mine a friend of mine who does this technology research is the Air Force might have been testing an artificial intelligence algorithm on that plane, and it went haywire. I don't have any
and they just had a
confirmation.
human pilot in there to.
Yeah, now please don't. This is just a theory, but
For
this
the
is more
record,
Joe
this is
Allen's.
Brandon
This is more
Weichert's
Joe
theory.
Allen's. Yeah, this is sort of more on Joe Allen's frequency for his book Dark Aeon.
Yeah, and
But
Joe Allen is the artificial intelligence
yeah,
guru. He just wrote a
but
new
that
book
is
behind me, and
yeah,
hopefully I'll get you guys on.
great. It's
Brandon,
great,
I need to
yeah.
I need to wrap it up. Oh,
Okay.
go ahead. Finish
I
what
was
you're
just going to
saying.
say I think it was probably a hack, but the crazy theory I heard was that it was a new AI algorithm that went haywire.
I'm gonna have to talk to Joe Allen. I want to get both of you guys on a live stream, and we've got to tear this thing open. Brandon Weichert came to talk about Biohacked. Instead, we got. You're a genius, man. I'm so impressed with your level of knowledge. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. Hopefully, we'll be old men someday talking about way back when, you know. But anyways, Biohack, we will have Brandon back really soon, probably on a live stream. Get this book. And Brandon, really quickly, how do people find you?
You can find me on Twitter or Getter or Truth Social under the same handle @WeTheBrandon, but I'm usually on Twitter or X, I guess, or Twix, whatever they're calling it now.
Excellent. Well, Brandon Weichert, thank you again for coming on, and thanks for wow, amazing amount of knowledge. We could talk for hours, and we're going to. Hopefully, we'll have you up to New York or Boston soon. But we are always happy to come to Florida as well. You've got
you're always welcome.
Yep, I think you have some more family than I do who are currently munchkins. So we would love to come down. But anyways, Brandon Weichert, author of Biohacked, author of Winning Space and many others, military guru, hopefully our next, leader of our intelligence capability, at least on the military side. You're a wealth of knowledge. I really thank you for that. And we'll have you back. So this is, this has been Brian O'Shea with Mostly Peaceful, which it was today. I was happy to have my guest, Brandon Weichert, author of Biohacked, and we look forward to having him back. Please send your questions to brian@dailyclout.io. You can find me on Getter @Brian O'Shea, on Twitter @Brian O'Shea SPI, and I'll post all these for you, and I'll post Brandon's links as well. And we want to hear your comments. We want to hear your questions. And based on the amount of questions, we will certainly get a live stream going so we can answer those in real time. Brandon, thanks again.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. See ya.
Hey everyone, it's Naomi Wolf of DailyClout, and I just want to give a thank you to our sponsor, The Wellness Company, whose chief medical team includes some of our most respected colleagues, including Dr. Peter McCullough and Dr. Harvey Risch. So the Wellness Company offers COVID and vaccine injury treatments, including ivermectin, as well as dietary supplements based on the guidance of these noted physicians and epidemiologists, such as Spike Support, which is designed to help combat spike protein. So click on the link below or head to dailyclouthealth.com to purchase their products. You can also gift healthcare to your loved ones, which is something I've been doing. I'm excited about the Wellness Company being able to offer medical advice without the pressure of big pharma. Please use the code DailyClout for 10% off. Thank you again to the Wellness Company, our sponsor. Bye-bye.